2 Samuel 15. This is a really interesting moment in King David's life. Now, do you remember last time we read about poor Tamar, who was raped by her brother? Her brother Amnon, who was a naughty boy, pretended he was sick. And then we never know. It's not actually revealed who the mother is, except we're just told that Tamar's mother, Tamar and Absalom were of the same mum, and Absalom's mum, David took as a concubine when he conquered one of the tribes, because David, as a king, as a warrior king, he would go out fighting and he would conquer. And he forcibly took one of the women to be like his concubine. Horrible, yes. And so you can sort of see where Absalom got that anger from. David goes, conquers his tribes, and then grabs his ladies and says, "You there, you're going to be my wife." So because of that, this lady, we don't know her name, she was one of David's concubines. She, I reckon, was quite angry and quite bitter. And you see that reflected in Absalom. Absalom, who was her firstborn through David, was a very, very angry man. And we're going to read now how Absalom became so anti-David. He actually almost hated his dad to the point that he decided, I am going to take over my dad's throne. That is how much he hated his dad. I reckon it came from the fact that he remembered my mom was kidnapped by David and was taken away captive. That's why Absalom didn't have any problem when it came to killing Amnon. Amnon, remember, raped Tamar, and Tamar was Absalom's sister. So you can imagine, in Absalom, there's already this anger that my mom was kidnapped. I know the story of my mom. She was kidnapped by this King David, and then I was born through that whole relationship. So in Absalom is already this sense of this King David person. Who does he think he is? Like kidnapping my mom and then like taking her away, and then my siblings are born. And then Amnon, the eldest boy, goes and rapes his sister. Can you imagine how much anger there would have been in Absalom? So Absalom, in the previous chapters, in chapter 13, Absalom plotted to kill Amnon. Amnon was the rapist, the one who raped Tamar, and Absalom said, right, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna kill Amnon. So he did that. And because he did that, there is a Jewish law which dates back to Numbers, actually dates back to Exodus, I was reading about it yesterday, that if there is a quarrel that arises between you, like between your siblings, between Church Grace, or between myself and my siblings, and one of us hits each other, and it gets so bad that one dies, basically, there is somebody in the community called the Avenger of Blood. Like he's given that title literally as the Avenger of Blood, who has permission to then kill me because of the deed that I have done accidentally. Well, if I have killed on purpose my brother or my sister. He's supposed to right the scales. That's in Numbers. So if my brother or my sister is killed by me, I get really angry with my brother and I stone him and I kill him, then basically there's somebody in the family who's supposed to bring a sense of justice, and only he, nobody else can do it. It's supposed to stop vigilantism, really. It's supposed to be only him, and only he can actually execute. Really what's supposed to happen is it's meant to be a case where it's all heard in front of the elders, and then if his guilt is established, then he has to be put to death by the Avenger of Blood.
It's supposed to send a loud message then.
Exactly.
You can't go around killing
Don't go killing your brother or your sister. But if it was accidental,
how do we know they weren't there?
that's where they would have to have a case around them. They'd bring witnesses, they'd bring people who maybe saw the whole thing or whatever. They'd have like a court case you have today. They'd have a case, basically, and they would try and establish if the person did it on purpose or if they did it accidentally. Go on. What were we going to ask?
That can't always be
With the witnesses, how
Yeah.
do they could be? Maybe they don't like me. They're gonna say, "Actually, yes, we saw
Ah.
it. They were there." They can't believe
She's on
them.
the ball. She's on the ball. God saw this. God actually saw that this is a possibility that it would happen. It's very helpful. I was reading Exodus yesterday because your questions are being answered by this. Because what God saw, that there will come times when people will cheat on other people. Like if I hate that person and I see there's an opportunity so that I can be a false witness, I go to court and I make up stories so that that person gets framed. Now God put in his law that actually, it happened to Jesus exactly, that actually if you are a false witness and it is found that you are a false witness, you could be put to death. So that was the retardant. So you're risking yourself if you decide to go out there and decide to frame somebody else, because if it gets found out and the evidence gets brought out before the elders, the avenger of blood is coming after you. Exactly. So David's son Absalom, he was angry and he killed Amnon for raping his sister. Because of that, he knew basically that because he's done this, there is something coming down his path. It's like he's a marked man, basically. So he ran away. He legged it, he ran away. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 14, we see him running away, and then he goes off and flees to a faraway place. But then Joab, David's commander, the commander of David's army, says to David, "Hey David, look, it's not a good idea that you and Absalom carry this grudge to your death," basically. So Joab hatches a plan for David and Absalom to be reconciled. Cut a long story short, Absalom is brought back into the royal family. He's welcomed back. It's a bit like Prince Philip and Harry, isn't it? Imagine if the king decided to forgive Harry and say, "Harry, you've been really, really daft. I'm going to welcome you back. I'm going to forgive you." That's what David did. David basically said, even though you've done this horrible thing, you've killed your brother, you've killed my firstborn son Amnon, I am going to forgive you and you can come back and be in the throne. Big mistake. It was a big mistake because in Absalom, there was still this thing that was saying, "I want to be king instead of David. I want to be king instead of David. I don't like this David guy." And so David made a big mistake in trusting Absalom in bringing him back. Well, was it a mistake? God was in charge. So let's look at the story. 2 Samuel chapter 15. All of that is just by way of introduction. This is what it says.
Bitterness there somewhere.
Sorry?
There's a root of bitterness there.
Bitterness. Yeah, you spotted that. Yeah. Resentment, anger. So, 2 Samuel chapter 15. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 bodyguards to run before him. Now, Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision that Absalom would, hey, call them.
Oh, yes.
Call them, "Hey, why do you want to go to the king? You don't really want to go to the king. Come to me, come and listen to me. I can tell you, I can help you sort this problem out." So anyone who came to the king for a decision, Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." And then Absalom would say to him, Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy to the king to hear you. Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were judge in the land, and everyone who has a suit would cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." So what was wrong about Absalom's attitude? Have you ever seen this at work, where somebody wants somebody else's job?
Power hungry.
Yeah, just like, it's almost like he's so desperate. Like, are you that desperate?
So he sees people are coming to the king to get their problems sorted. And he's like, come to me, come to me, come to me. So,
David had quite a quiet spell then.
verse 5, and so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. The king must have noticed, suddenly nobody's coming to me. Anyhow, so that way, Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Rather than them being loyal to David, they became loyal to him. Verse 7, now it came to pass after 40 years. 40 years.
Is it 40 or 4?
Your one probably says 4 years. That's right. New King James says 40 years because some translations will say 40 years.
4 scores.
Some will say 4 years. 4 years is actually the correct one. The 40 years is referring to 40 years since David came to the throne. But really 4 years is since Absalom came back. So for 4 years he was doing this. So it was quite a persistent thing that he kept doing. So after 4 years, that Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron. Let me go to that city, Hebron. Hebron, by the way, at that point was quite an important city. The second most important city after Jerusalem at the time. So Absalom said, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, as in brings me back into my family, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, go in peace. David, ever being so trusting, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem. And they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite. Now, Ahithophel was a very important person. He was King David's senior advisor. Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city in Gilo, while he was there offering sacrifices. And Ahithophel had clearly sided with Absalom at this point, because it says from then on the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. Now, a messenger came to David saying, hey David, you need to be careful. The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. So David hit the panic buttons. David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, we are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands. Then the king went out with all his household after him. But the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him, and all the Cherethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed David from Gath. They all came and paraded and passed before the king went basically and left Jerusalem. Incidentally, David chose his closest bodyguard from, none of them were really Jewish. They were Cherethites, or they were Pelethites, or they were Gittites, which is it was a wise thing to do as a king then. Don't pick your bodyguards from those closest to you, basically. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why are you coming with us? Go back, remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your place. In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I make you wander up and down with us today? Since I go, I know not where. Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you." But Ittai, this really loyal soldier, he answered the king and said, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, surely whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant shall be." So David said to Ittai, "Go and cross over." Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over. And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The reason all the country wept, civil war had broken out. War between Absalom and David. Then the king himself, he left his throne, he crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. There was Zadok, who at the time was the high priest, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over from the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you," in other words, if God says to David, "I have no delight in you, here I am, let him do to me as seems good to him." David here was kind of recognizing maybe some of what's going on in his life was because of his problem with Bathsheba. Because remember, he had the thing with Bathsheba. And then Nathan the prophet came and told him, because of that problem, there will be war in your family. And there will be problems in your family. So David here, in verse 26, he says, verse 25, "Take the ark of the covenant back into the city. If God sees it fit to forgive me, maybe I will be able to come back and see it. But if he says, no, this is your punishment, if this is the lot that is yours," then David said, "Well, let him do to me as seems good to him." The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Are you not a seer?" In other words, a prophet. "Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there, where there were going to be spies for David while his son reigned. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went up. And he had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. Then someone told David, "Ahithophel," remember your advisor? "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." And David said to him, "O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshipped God, there was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go on with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I was your father's servant previously, so I will be your servant, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priests there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Indeed, they have there with them their 2 sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send me everything you hear." So Hushai's David's friend, went back into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. That last little phrase at the end of verse 37 is really important. At that point, Absalom realized David has left the city. Absalom now came into the city. Right? This is him now coming to reign. Now, if we read the next chapter, we're coming to really what I wanted to share today. And it's to do with how we deal with hurts and pains. When David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Ziba, who was a servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, "What do you mean to do with these?" So Ziba said, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink." Then the king said, "Where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me.'" Now, let me just give you a bit of background with this. Ziba was a servant of somebody called Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth, it's a mouthful to say, was King Saul's son. Actually, King Saul killed Saul's grandson. So King Saul was a king before David, right?
Yeah.
King Saul had a son called Jonathan. Anybody heard of Jonathan?
Yes.
And David and Jonathan were really, really good friends. So King Saul and Jonathan went to fight the Philistines in a battle, and they died. But before they did that, David had the opportunity to have a one-to-one meeting with Jonathan, King Saul's son, and they made a covenant. Jonathan recognized that David was beginning to ascend to the throne, even though his dad was in charge. Jonathan could see this David chap. At that time, he wasn't king. There's something special about him. He'd killed Goliath, he'd fought a few battles, and he looked like he was definitely going to become king. So Jonathan called David aside in secret and said to David, "Let's make a covenant between us." And Jonathan gave him his royal cloak, like his royal clothing, and said to David, "David, here's my royal cloak, here's my royal covering, my royal cloak, whatever." Saul at that time was king, and he smelled a rat.
That's really humble, isn't it? Jonathan's
Yes.
laying down his
Exactly.
right to the throne.
Saul smelled a rat. He thought there was a conspiracy happening between Jonathan and David, that they're colluding something. So he turned and became really horrible towards David. He tried to kill him a number of times. David had to flee for his life, basically. And for
So much in history.
this is true.
Kill
For
the future.
10 years, for 10 whole years, David was running away from King Saul. 3 times, King Saul came to within a whisker of killing him. Like it was this close. Like David was there, and Saul was there, and it was
In
like
the cave as well.
there was once in a cave, there was once on a hill, and it was like this close. If God had not protected David, it would have been off with his head. Because King Saul had a really strong army. He had by that time David had a smallish army, but it was nowhere like King Saul's army. And when King Saul decided it's off with David's head, he got the best commandos in his army and said, "You have one mission, bring me the head of David."
They clearly weren't that good because they didn't kill him.
They didn't, exactly. And God helped them. Oh, God helped David, rather. King Saul and Jonathan, the son, went to fight the Philistines. And they both died. It was part of God's plan that actually David would then become the king. Now, David then remembered 10 years later that I had made this covenant with Jonathan. that actually I will not do anything harmful towards anybody in his family. That's what the covenant actually said. So when he became king, he then said, is there anybody in King Saul's family that's left that I can be nice to, that I can be kind to? So then the advisors then said to King David, there is actually one person. He's lame. He's crippled. Because what really happened to him, when King Saul and Jonathan were fighting with the Philistines overcame them and they had to run. And Jonathan and David died. But Jonathan had a little son and she was being nursed by this little son. And as the mother realized that the battle was not going really good, she picked the little son up and ran off. But she didn't quite do a good job of picking him up. And she dropped him and his legs broke. And so from a very young age, he was crippled. So what David then did was he asked, this is now much later than after all this had happened. David then says basically, is there anybody in Saul's house to whom I can show a good thing, like who I can be nice to? Even though Saul himself was nasty to me and wanted to kill me for 10 years, I made a covenant with Jonathan. Is there anybody in David's household, in Saul's household rather, for whom I can be nice to? And he was told him, there's this crippled guy. He was crippled from birth, and this is what happened. And so David said, you know what, bring him. From today, he will eat at my table. He will eat with me, he will be a king, and he will be like me. Fascinatingly, by the way, Mephibosheth, who was crippled because of what happened to him, that thing that happened to him defined him. So that when he was brought before the king, the words he actually spoke was, who am I, a rubbish dead dog, that your king would consider to even bring me near you? Because his disability defined him. He allowed that disability, I mean, it's understandable sometimes, you can sort of empathize. He allowed that disability to define him. So when the king says to him, you're going to eat at my table, he was like, who am I that you would consider doing this to me?
He felt like a nobody.
He felt like a nobody. But the king insisted anyway. Now, this crippled guy had a servant called Ziba. But Ziba was a little bit naughty. Because he realized that David now was being really favorable towards his cripple, his master who was crippled. So David basically said to Mephibosheth, the cripple, because Jonathan was good to me, you can have all these lands, you can have all this property, it will belong to you, and none of my people will come after you. Now Ziba, his servant, looked at all of that and he went, oh, my master is a cripple, and he suddenly become really, really rich. And so now we come to why in chapter 16, Mephibosheth's servant, he sees David now fleeing from the throne much later, and he sees an opportunity. He says, if I show niceness to David, maybe all that stuff that he's given Mephibosheth, my master, can actually come to me. And then he chose to be a bad witness. Remember, you're asking about being a bad witness? He began to taint a picture of his master, saying, actually, my master has sided with Absalom. He's picked your enemy's side, therefore don't trust him anymore. And then here are all these nice things. You can have all these nice things, donkeys, food, all that. Which is why it says now, as David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, who came to him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them were 200 loaves of, imagine 200 loaves of bread. 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, why have you given me this? What do you mean to do? Come on, Ziba, be honest, tell me. And then Ziba comes out, and he's obviously thought about his story before. So he says, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. The bread and the summer fruit are for the young men to eat. And the wine for those who are faint. You know, you're in the wilderness, you're tired, mate. You need something to eat. And then the king, he asks the direct question, where is Mephibosheth, your master's son? In other words, Jonathan's son. Where is Mephibosheth? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem. For today, he said, the house of Israel will restore the kingdom back to me, back to Saul, as in back to... He made up this story, basically, to make it look like Mephibosheth had turned against David. Because all along, really, what he was after was what David had given Mephibosheth.
This is a real Game of Thrones, isn't
It is a Game of Thrones. It is an absolute conspiracy. So Ziba said, indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem. For he said, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. Big mistake from the king. Because that's what Ziba was after all along. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you, that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O Lord, the king. For some of us who've seen these things happening in our families, Lucy, we are familiar with these things, aren't we? Where people come very cunningly and they have something they want. And they will try this way and that, this way and that, this way and that. They'll be nice. They'll come with gifts. Hey, why don't you have this? Why don't you have this? All along, really what they want you to do is to make a decision in their favor, and they want you to side with them. Now, we're going to come across another person who was also involved with King Saul. He was part of King Saul's family. And this is kind of coming to the nub of my message. Now, when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man also from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimmei, the son of Gera, coming from there. Now he came out cursing continuously as he came. So Ziba came out really wily and really whatever. But Shimmei came out and is like cursing as he's coming out to meet David. David, bear in mind, is running away for his life because of Absalom. And he comes out cursing at him as he came. And Shimmei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man.
Whoa, that sounds very strong.
That's
worse than
Cursing.
swearing.
So you can see that Shimmei was harboring a little bit of a grudge towards David because of what had happened. Now, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Abishai happened to be one of the senior commanders in the army. He said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please, let me go over and take off his head. Let's just put an end to all of this. The commander of the army basically said, let's just do this. David, this guy is cursing. Anyhow, so Abishai basically, the king's commander says, let's just put an end to this. We've got enough problems as it is. We're fleeing from Absalom. Let's just go and kill this guy. But the king said, king's answer is very, very interesting. He says, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, or Zeruiah? I can't spell that, I can't pronounce that properly. Zeruiah had two sons, Joab and Abishai. Both were commanders in the army. Joab was the senior commander, the one in charge of the whole army, and Abishai was like the next in command, pretty much. Now, they were hot-tempered people. They were a little bit like James and John, when I think about it, in Sons of Thunder in the Gospel. They were very hot-tempered people, and they were in charge of the army. So, because of that, they were like, this guy is just cursing us. Let's just go off with his head. And then the king turns and says, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Let him curse. Because the Lord has said to him, curse David. Who then shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how my son, who came from my own body, seeks my life. How much more now this Benjaminite? I mean, it makes sense. He would want my life. my own family is treating me like this. Is it a surprise that this guy is going to be this Benjaminite from Saul's family? Is it a surprise? And he says, let him alone. Let him curse. For so God has ordered him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction. Now this is the key of what I was going to say today. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. I'll repeat that line again. It's a really, really fascinating and really revealing line. David says, it may be that the Lord will look on my affliction because of this man's cursing, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. It's like David saw an opportunity in that man's cursing. Can you see that? It's like the man is cursing and he's coming out, and instead of David getting all angry, David says, let him do his thing. It may be that as he does that it will put me in such a place that actually God will look on my affliction.
God can turn bad into good.
Sorry?
Because God can take the bad into good.
He can turn the whole situation around. And rather than David hitting back, David says, it may be that God has allowed this so that he will look on my affliction. So I will cry out to him and he will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me good for his cursing this day.
They basically do it to himself.
Sorry?
They basically do it to themselves. But they put themselves in that.
Exactly. Very, very good. Yeah, exactly. Because it's as if it is a little bit like Jesus said, pray for your enemies. Because as you do, you heap coals on their head. Yeah. It's a strange thing that actually when you pray for them, what they want against you actually ends up hitting back at you.
Yeah. But also, David calls upon the Lord in his affliction.
Yes.
So he's inviting God into the situation.
Yes.
So he's
to take charge.
Yeah.
Yes. Very
and
important.
that's why he wanted David's life, because he really genuinely loved the Lord.
Yes.
He genuinely synced him.
True. This is the challenge for us. What happens when people come to us and they're hurtful and they're mean and they're horrible? Do we see it as, well, let them just carry on being like that? Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just going to let God deal with it because I just...
Sometimes you can't do anything.
So don't forget actually you reap what you sow. So be careful you give people.
But the good thing is, the important thing is realize that actually sometimes those bad things that are coming against you, there could be opportunity. What David here is saying is, for this cursing this day, for this specific incident, God will look on my affliction and he will bring me good. He will bring me good. And so it happened, this is where the throwing of the stones happened in verse 13. And as David and his men went along the road, Shimmei went on the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went, and he threw stones like from the hillside. You can imagine he's chucking stones at them. And the king's army, the commander of his army is going, let's get his head off, let's chop his head off. And David goes, nah, don't worry about him. Don't worry about him. Just let him have his moment. You will never know, because God may have allowed this because he wants to bring favor. He wants to bring good in my life. Are you able to look at your life in this way, that actually the stones that are being hurled at you, the things that are being chucked at you, it could be there's opportunity. How you deal with them though, how you deal with them, it's so important how you deal with them. Because David could have listened to his commander and said, off with his head. Right, this is it. In fact, there was an incident earlier on. What's the time? We don't have time to go into it now. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 25, when something similar happened. And then David wasn't so mature. David did not have the maturity and the wisdom. And somebody did something really bad to him. And he was like, do you know what? By tomorrow morning at this time, there will be no more man. There will be no more male person in that person's household by tomorrow at this time.
Yikes.
And he was like, right,
You're having
this is it. This is it. This is you've called it on yourself, mate. This is what you're gonna get. And he was gonna come out with the guns blazing until a really interesting incident happened. Have any of you heard of the story of Abigail?
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what happened, but
Abigail. Basically, there was this really foolish guy whose name was Nabal, which actually means fool.
Really? It's in the name.
Imagine being called a fool.
It's in the name.
Now-
His mother brought it on him.
Yeah, that's a very sad thing, isn't it?
His mother cursed him.
Nabal was a really interesting guy. Nabal had lots of sheep. He was a sheep shearer. He was like a shepherd, basically. And David, during the time that he was running away from Saul, David basically was running around and he was in the wilderness and he came across this Nabal guy. And he made a bit of a deal with him. He said, hey, Nabal, I have a small army. Here's what. There are band raiders and there are people who come after your sheep from time to time. I'll protect your sheep if you just give me a little bit of food and you help me out here and there. And David made this agreement with Nabal. Well, there came a time when David came to make good on that deal. And Nabal was like, he could see Saul was gaining on David.
Yeah.
And so he thought, well, David probably won't be alive tomorrow. He's going to be a goner. So Nabal, being the fool, said, when David said, hey, I want to come and stay with you guys, I want to chill out, I need a bit of refuge because I'm being hounded, he was like, sorry, I don't know you.
what?
I don't know you.
Turned his back.
Talk to the hand, as they say nowadays. Talk to the hand.
It just gets.
I do not know you.
Wow.
Things get very stupid.
And what then happened there? David was like, he said what? He said what?
Say what?
So he was like, do you know what? Tomorrow at this time, God do so to me if there is not a person, a single male left in this person's house. And so he summed up his whole army. His whole army at that time were really tired and they were really hungry. They were really hungry, rather. But you know, they were so incensed that they forgot their tiredness and their hunger and they thought, we are off. They put their swords in the whatever and they were like, we're going to whatever.
Wow.
Abigail. This is where Abigail comes in. A beautiful lady. She married this fool. Have you ever come across? Have you ever come across that where you come up, you see couples, you're not like, how did those two come together? How did those two ever come together?
I don't get it.
I don't quite catch that picture. Well, Abigail was wise, and she figured out what Nabal was doing was really daft. It was really daft. So what she did, she got some servants.
Wise to see that.
She got some servants and she ran on ahead to meet David as David was coming towards the whole household, basically. She and the servants, they ran on with lots of loaves of bread. And basically to appease David, she got down on her knees. She said to David, David, I am here and I have come basically to...
Excuse my husband.
Yeah, exactly. There's a fool in the house, and it's just ignore him, basically. And she whatever. And you know, because of her intercession, that one Abigail is the one who turns away wrath.
Wow.
So if you ever see an Abigail,
I literally thought the bread
She-
is gonna protect them from the
from
I'll take that.
so Abigail will be chucking bread at David, basically.
Slice that
So-
bread, slice that bread.
Abigail brought out all this bread, basically, and she turned King David's heart around. And because of that, David. So that was much earlier on when David was a little bit immature. This time, Shimmei, now I want you to get this. Shimmei was from Saul's house.
Yes.
And he's going along throwing stones at David, right? He's trying to get, Lucy said something really important. He is trying to get a reaction because he knows I'm from the household of Saul. And so within David, there will be a wound within David that Saul tried to kill me. For 10 years, Saul tried to kill me. And so this man from Saul's household, from Saul's family, and so he came throwing stones saying, you wicked man, you bloodthirsty man.
He's strong and bold.
But David did not react.
He's strong.
He did not react. This is one of the things I want to say to you guys, really important. When people chuck stones at you, how you react is so very important. It could be that those things are being chucked at you to get a reaction. And that reaction will land you in a lot of hot water. And you will find yourself in a situation where you regret your reaction. Because actually your reaction causes you more trouble than the original trouble that this person was bringing you.
Yeah.
So you need to be so very wise as to how you react. David basically says to them, don't worry, don't react, don't. His army are like, let's off with his head, let's be done with him. And then basically it says, verse 13, David said to his men and everybody else, just don't panic, don't worry. Or verse 11, David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how even Absalom, who's from my own body, is seeking my life. How much more may this Benjaminite, this man from Saul's family, he's got the permission to do that. Well, not permission, but I can understand he will do that. If my own son would do this to me, I can understand that this man from Saul's household, who's seen me take the throne from his father, it's understandable that he's going to behave this way. So he says to him, let him alone, let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. My translation says, it may be that the Lord will look on my affliction and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. And David and his men went along the road. Shimmei went along the hillside opposite him, cursed as he went, throwing stones at him, and kicked up the dust. Now the king and all the people who were with him became weary, so they refreshed themselves there. This is what I wanted to ask you guys. When you look at yourself, when people throw stones at you, how do you react?
Literally, I act like I'm so quiet. I just go silent and I'll just look at you, and then you'll be like, I'll make you feel like, why is she quiet? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but sometimes people see.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't externally show anger, but internally they are. As well.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
that. Yeah. But don't forget, God sees it all. That's the scary part.
Yeah.
This is true.
God sees it all.
How you react, you might be outside, you're like,
I'll be
it's
honest
all
with
fine.
you,
But in your heart, you're like,
exactly.
give me a gun and I will show you what I really feel like.
Which is really worse.
Sorry?
Which is really worse, because if that's the uttermost part of you,
Yeah.
what are you...
If you're burying it, it's not good. So some of us react when we are hurt. Let's be honest with ourselves. I mean, we're not like saints. Well, saints is not. We are saints. The Bible describes us as saints, but we are not like we are not perfect. Put it that way. If we are honest, when we get hurt, and especially when that hurt touches a wound that was there before,
Yeah, that's a hard part.
because this man was from Saul's family. And Saul had hounded David for 10 years in the past. And so it was like the enemy was trying to get at a wound. And it was fascinating. David here is under a lot of attack. His own son kicks him from the throne.
Yeah.
And then the first person, Ziba, comes from Saul's house and tries to deceive him to steal all his master's stuff. And then after that, you have this Shimmei guy who then comes and starts chucking stones at him.
Serious attack.
David was like being attacked left, right, and center. And yet he had the wherewithal in that moment to respond in grace. To be, because he was much more mature. But if we are honest, rarely do we do that. I mean, some of us, I know sometimes if I'm hurt, especially if it touches a wound, have any of you had a situation where you've been wounded, say you've had a graze, or you've had whatever, and then you accidentally touch it against something? What does it feel like?
It brings it all back.
It brings it, the memory comes flooding back. That's what Shimmei would have done to David. The memory would have all come flooding back. And sometimes somebody can do something to you or say something to you, and the volume of stuff that comes up from you, you're like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Sometimes they might even say something innocent, but they touch a wound that hasn't been healed. And they say something just in innocence, but because there's a wound there that's lying dormant, they touch that wound and you react and you remain seething in your anger. And it stays with you. And you're just there, kind of seething.
Thing is not to react physically, isn't it?
Yes.
And sometimes you react and get cross with yourself. Why did I react? I know I shouldn't.
Yes, true.
You know?
There is a proverb that says, I forget what it is, about somebody who is not in control of his anger, which can happen if you're wounded. If you're wounded and then something touches your wound and you sort of almost like a reflex, before you've even thought about it, boom.
Yeah.
What's that, sorry, George?
Like you flipped, you're like,
Yeah, exactly.
reaction, they call it.
It's like exactly, you just go bam, and you hit somebody back before you thought about it. How you respond to offense
Speaks for you.
when things are offensive towards you, when somebody is offensive towards you, especially if it's repeated offense, it keeps happening again and again. Because this man, as they were going along, he's chucking stones, and he's cursing. If it's a repeated thing, and it keeps happening again and again and again, and then it's touching an old wound. This man is from Saul's house. He's from Saul's house. But you see how David puts things into perspective. Yeah, he's from Saul's house. But my own household, Absalom, my own household is after me. What is this? This is nothing. He puts things a little bit into perspective. And because of that, he's able to calm everybody around him. One of the things that can happen in those moments is that a whole thing of mob justice. Have you ever heard of mob justice? Where basically somebody does something against somebody in my family, and because they've done that against somebody in my family, it's not just only them that rise up in revenge, but all of us, like a mob, we gun up.
Or mob mentality.
Exactly, and we then decide we are going to hit them. We are going to fire back at them because of what they've done to my family. And the thing sounds familiar.
This should be the theme of our past 2 days.
Oh, no, not me.
Not us personally, but
Yeah.
there was somebody that was talking to us about that. That one man offended their family. They went the whole lot to their front door.
Exactly. Sometimes what can happen is actually they go around, like a conspiracy really, they go around and they sort of start discussing with other people to rise up. And the thing with the mob mentality, actually psychologists have studied this, is that it can take on a mind of its own.
Yeah.
Before you know it, people who are not natured like that. What happened in Rwanda, by the way? Anybody remember? Anybody ever heard about Rwanda?
A lot happened in Rwanda.
Genocide,
Yeah.
basically. The Hutus and the Tutsis fought. Basically, what happened is there was a president from the Hutu tribe, and he, for a long time, was president. But during that time, he kept saying the Tutsis are bad people. The radio would keep playing this everywhere. He kept saying the Hutsis are bad people. The Hutsis are bad people. And he went around also kind of personally sort of encouraging that message, basically. So what then happened? He one day got on a plane and he went to fly somewhere else. And sadly, the plane was involved in a crash. And what did the Hutus who were there think? It was that tribe that were responsible. Because remember, they've been fed this constant, the Tutsis are bad people, the Tutsis are bad people, the Tutsis are bad people. So they began to take on board this thing that actually it was them what did it. And so because of that, the Hutus basically took out sword and decided, and do you know, many Hutus decided to just go killing Tutsis, many people who, in their own nature, I remember they interviewed somebody in prison. I watched a really fascinating interview of somebody in prison who was imprisoned because he'd gone around and killed a whole family. And he was in prison and somebody asked him, why did you do this? And this man said, I don't know, it was like something just came over us. It was like something just came over us because I'm a sensible man. My children and their children play with each other, and yet he went and killed all their children. Imagine that. So it was like something just mob mentality. And it can so easily happen. So it happened to Jesus. Once the Pharisees whipped up the crowds, suddenly all these witnesses came out giving false testimony. And they were nothing to do with anything. But they were whatever. And so how we react when we see, not just us, maybe a family member being hurt, are we going to then become conspiratorial, whatever, I can't say the word, and encourage that mob, which is what was happening with Abishai, really, the army. What the army were trying to do is whip up, let's go get rid of his head. But David was able to restrain them. He had that strength of character and wisdom to say, guys, perspective, Absalom, my own son, is after me. Who's this guy? Let him carry on doing this. Perhaps even what he's doing might bring blessing to me. Let it just carry on. And so I want to encourage you, when you're being troubled by things, number one, recognize, once you belong to God, God will not allow anything to happen to you that he's not permitted. It's part of the deal. It's part of the covenant you enter into with God, that everything that happens in your life, he will allow. Satan has to ask for permission, actually. So it happened, you read about it in Luke chapter 22, I think it is, where Satan goes and asks for permission to sift Peter. God is able to use what Satan is doing for your good.
Yeah, amen.
If you allow it. So it's important to recognize when things hit you, when people are chucking stones at you, number one, recognize God has allowed it. David recognized that. Because of that, he did not react. His first port of call is, well, God's allowed this. And if he's allowed this, he's probably working out good for me.
That's what God is training us. You know?
There is an element of maturity as well, that actually Jesus, for 3 years, would have walked around with Judas, stealing money from him.
Yeah.
And yet, he didn't treat him any differently.
You could see. Yeah.
He could see everything. He could see what Judas was doing. He could see all the wickedness. And worse still, Jesus really cared for the poor people. And the money that Judas was stealing was the money that was meant to be going to the poor people. And yet, Jesus left him there because he could see what was coming to him. It's an important thing to be able to just trust God in that moment when people are throwing stones at you. Do not react. Recognize that God has allowed it, and probably for a reason. Maybe ask him, Lord, this is happening to me. Why is it happening? Could you show me, give me wisdom? Help me to understand if there is a lesson I need to learn here that will help me become a different person, a better person. Somebody that actually I am not today. But because of this thing, I will become somebody else. And then, in that, you can even then begin to give thanks. There's a verse I put in the WhatsApp group earlier in the week. In all circumstances, give thanks, because this is God's will for your life. In all circumstances, even when people are throwing stones at you, okay, God's allowed it, and he's working for my good. Therefore, even in the midst of this thing is not going to rob me of my thankfulness. It's not going to make me a grumbler. It's not going to make me react, like Lucy was saying. We react. It's not going to, because sometimes we can allow the incident to dominate us. We can allow it to rule over us. And then it's in charge of our emotions. It's in charge of our thoughts. Anytime, wherever it is, our thoughts are being fed things. It's in charge of the decisions we make. If we allow that, then we become slaves. We become slaves. And that's when really what was behind Shimmei was actually, it was meant to make David a slave. But David rose above it.
Pastor, you're preaching. Yes.
I'm preaching.
Pastor's preaching, isn't it?
I have 15 minutes. Coming to the end. Coming to the end. So do not let those moments rule your life.
Holy Spirit, sorry.
Do not let those moments rule your life. Recognize as well if you've got unhealed wounds in you. Satan used Shimmei and Ziba, really, people from the household of Saul, who would have reminded David of his past. They were bringing a memory of 10 years of hurt and pain of David's life. And Satan used those people on purpose because he was trying to get at a wound that thankfully within David had been healed. So David did not react out of that wound. You ever had a situation where your wound is healed and when you hit it, you don't even notice anything? Nothing. But if the wound is not healed, ouch, that's when we're more likely to react. So if we find ourselves doing the ouch, see it as an opportunity to think, okay, Lord, is there a wound in me that I need to bring to you? Remember we said, the Lord is my shepherd, his rod and his staff, they comfort me. If there is a wound in you, if there is something that you see yourself reacting, take notes, quick. Dennis reacted like this on such and such a day, and put it in your prayer diary that I need to bring this to God today because God and I need to talk about this, because if that wound stays there, it'll become septic, it'll become poisonous, and it will rule your life. It'll end up ruling your life. You will become bitter, you will become resentful, you will begin to become angry, and before you know it, God will begin to be far away from you.
I feel like if someone does something, you should communicate with them because they might not even know that they've done something. So when you keep quiet and then it's gonna build up and I get angry every day.
Yes.
And then out of the blue you just blow.
Yes.
Like, whoa, where's this coming from?
Yeah, we have to address our issues, definitely. Yeah.
It's a good thing to talk to the person, definitely. What I would say is, if they say something, confront them. If they do something or say something, by all means, do have that conversation with them. But be careful that the heart you come to them with is not that. You did this to me. I am going to show you what you're whatever. It's a little bit like treating other people as you want to be treated yourself. You will have moments of weakness when you do daft things to other people. Imagine if they then use those daft things to come to you and go, bo, 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 bo. You'd want a bit of grace, wouldn't you? Yeah. So treat other people as you would have them treat you. So as you come to confront them, the best attitude to confront somebody is thinking, how can I help this person to become a better person? So don't let it be about you. Yes, in a way, acknowledge your feelings. It's important to acknowledge your feelings. And it's important to acknowledge what you think, what they've done to you, how that's cost you. But then there is where you can rise above that and you can say, I want to help this person to become a better person. Lord, give me wisdom. Help me as I'm telling this person, how can they become a better person? I would say it's an even good thing to ask the question, is it my place to confront this person? Because it wasn't Jesus' place to confront Judas. He left it to his dad. And his dad surely did confront. There came a day when Judas was faced with what he did. And so if Jesus had usurped that role and jumped in and decided to confront, he could have spoiled what God wanted to do.
So really be praying, not my will, but yours.
Exactly.
Use me, Lord.
Yes. Yeah. It could be that it's not your place. It could be that it's not your place to confront. One way you can know that it's not your place is if it's sort of to do with authority. So for example, if I see, unless it's something like super brazenly whatever that my senior pastor does, more often than not, I would pray, Lord, put around him people that will help him to recognize what he's doing. I'll ask God, is it my place? Is it really, really my place to go and speak to him? Now, it may be that God may say, yes, it is your place. I want you to go and speak to him. But it's a good thing to ask, is it my place or is it not? And then if God makes it clear to you that it's your place, be careful that attitude that you do it with. Because if you come with vengeance, believe you me, you might pour out your vengeance on the person, but in your heart, your wound will not be healed. You might flood up. I remember there's a lady who says, I want to give them a piece of my mind. You might give them that piece of your mind, but it will do nothing for your wound.
Another piece is still left in you.
There is still things in you that are left unhealed for another day that will one day come. And
that's when that curse will land, isn't it? Because already you've opened a door for the curse if you didn't have anything in you.
Yes.
That's when that curse.
That's when it's waiting to go boom, waiting for you to whatever. So do to others as you would have them do to you. Let me just finish with this. It's Ephesians chapter 4 verse 3. Let me just find it.
That's a bit of, fulfilled life with God, I guess, yeah.
As Christ has.
Is it still in the Oh, it's at the end.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I've got it. It's 4:30. Sorry, Ephesians 4:32. I think.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
And be kind to one another,
Yeah.
tender-hearted, forgiving one another.
That's the
even as
word.
God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven him.
That's the word. Well done. Well done.
I'm so excited by you.
Do you want to read it out again?
Or one of you, Mariah? One of you. Got a better voice. Okay, so Ephesians 4:32, yeah?
Yeah. Do you want to read from 31? Just
From 31,
yeah.
Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamour and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be ye kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you.
Amen. Amen.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Amen. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the forgiveness that Jesus has towards us. Thank you that he treated us not as we deserve. And even day by day, he treats us not as we deserve, but that you are merciful. Thank you for your mercies that are new every morning. You start the day afresh with us. Father, help us to remember your mercy day by day, moment by moment. Because as we do that, Lord, as we remember how you've been merciful to us, we'll be more likely to be merciful to other people. Father, as the scripture says, help us to get rid of bitterness. Bitterness is a really nasty thing. Help us to get rid of rage and anger and brawling and slander, along with every kind of malice. Father, we renounce these things now. Father, if these things are coming from a place of woundedness in us, I ask, Lord, that you would expose that wound and that you would bring healing into our hearts. Lord, heal us so that we do not become slaves of our own wounds. Father, help us to learn to be kind and compassionate to one another, acknowledging that just as we will sometimes offend other people, so we need to be merciful to others. Help us to forgive one another, to do it from the heart, not to harbor grudges, not to hold on to things, but to live a life free of that grudge. A life that is free of burden, a life that is not carrying things, carrying hurts or pains from the past. And Father, I know that as we do that, we will find a confidence to face life, even with all its horrible stuff. And Lord, you will bring to us a grace that can push us, that can encourage us, that can give us strength in life. So bless us, Lord, even as we go into the week. We want to shine for you in what is a crooked world, what is a dark and depraved world. But we want to bring something different as we go out into this world, as we touch it, as we engage with it, Lord. We want to be different. I pray your blessing upon us now. I pray your protection upon us. I pray, Father, that you would keep this message in the forefront in our mind to grow in maturity and to learn to take every opportunity, even those bad things that come against us, to see the opportunity in them that we can become more like you. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.